Hello again, it's Paul Gilbert here, looking at how the science of compassion can help us deal with stressful times. And we are looking at self-criticism. Now, in our last talk, talk 11, we looked at the nature of self-criticism and the evolutionary functions. And in this talk, we're going to be looking at that a little bit more, but also how we can work with self-criticism, how we can understand it and work with it. So in order to do that, I'm going to share my screens with you again. So here we go. The wonders of modern technology, hey? There we go. Okay, great. So working with self-criticism. Now, throughout our talks, we've been talking about the importance of understanding the algorithms of the mind, the mechanisms that set up a stimulus response function. And the one that we've been looking at last time was this one, this: if threatened by a more dominant or powerful other, what do one need to do? What does any animal need to do? It needs to engage in submissive behavior. Because if you fight with those that are more powerful than you, you just get injured and get hurt. So submissive behavior is an extremely important defensive behavior right the way through the animal kingdom. And there are very powerful brain mechanisms in the brain designed for setting up that system, okay? So we talked about that in our last talk. So we need to understand these pathways in the brain. That's the thing. So we have seen then that if somebody is bullying you, more powerful than you, could be a powerful parent, did it to you as a child or whatever it is, what you're going to do is you're going to be in a submissive position. You're going to be monitoring your behavior, trying to make sure you don't stimulate the aggressions from the parent or wherever it is. And when things do go wrong, you're going to be self-blaming. Now, we talked a lot about that in our last talk. But the point is that when you become self-critical, that self-criticism is the same signal. So you're going to be whacking into these same brain pathways, okay? So as one of my patients said, well, a number of them have said, that actually they realize that they criticize themselves into depression. They condemn themselves into depression because of their constant criticism, which was constantly stimulating these pathways in the brain. The only thing you're going to do when you do that is you're going to go down, okay? Because that's what the system is designed to do. It's not your fault. It's not your fault. But if you understand how it works, you've got a chance to change. Because what you can do then is to notice that we also have systems in the brain which, when we stimulate them, such as kindness and support and caring, that will activate very different physiological processes in your body, your vagus, for example. Whereas criticism stimulates your sympathetic system, compassion stimulates your parasympathetic system, if you remember from an earlier talk. So this is really important, that we can begin to literally change the systems in our brains and bodies that are being turned on and off. Okay, great. And we looked at this in another way in our last talk to say that when we're in a competitive system, we can get caught up in that partly because we've had difficult relationships of power dynamics where we've always had to do this maybe. Or we live in a culture where we're constantly comparing ourselves. There are two basic strategies that you get going. Most people are sort of a mixture of both, a little bit here, a little bit there. But some individuals get caught up in this, what we call the submissive or downrank strategies, where they compare themselves to others quite negatively. They experience shame. They feel that other people will put them down. They'll have a motto like, if you really knew about me, then you wouldn't like me, you wouldn't value me, you know. They're striving to prove themselves very often. They set high standards. And if they don't do very well, they attack themselves. The uprankers, on the other hand, and unfortunately, these are the individuals that tend to be more in control in business and in politics. These are the people that cause a lot of harm. They cause a lot of harm because they have a sense of entitlement and superiority. If you criticize them, they'll simply attack you back. And because they've taken a dominant position, that can be pretty difficult. They're striving really to constantly prove themselves powerful. And they, as I say, they blame others. They don't take much responsibility for causing error. And as for guilt, that's not, well, guilt is not something they do a lot of. So what we're wanting to do, particularly for those individuals who are caught up in the downrank strategies, to move over into caring strategies, because, as we've seen, motives run the mind, motives run your brain. And if you take a caring motivational system, then what you pay attention to, what you think about, how you behave, All of those things will be quite different than if you're in the competitive mind, okay? Great. The only other thing I should mention to you, which is quite important, but it's a big story, but I'm going to say this quite quickly, is this distinction between shame and guilt. Now, shame is all part of the competitive system, right? The rank system, and it's linked to feeling inferior, comparing yourself to others, thinking that other people look down on you. There it is again, being looked down on, the dominant attacking the subordinate. And when you have an experience of shame, you tend to have an experience of feeling inferior, unworthy, rejectable, okay? And you can have emotions of anxiety, confusion, sometimes anger with the self. Guilt, on the other hand, is part of the caring system, actually, not the rank system. It's the caring system. And this is because when animals evolved caring behavior, they had to also pay attention to times they could have inadvertently, unintentionally caused harm to their infants or whoever they're caring for, and then to immediately and as quickly as possible repair that harm or that damage, okay? So if a bird is sitting on the nest and they inadvertently sit too hard and start squashing the chick, they need to notice that and change their behavior quite quickly. Now, guilt is actually an extremely important behavior for humans. You can certainly overdo it, and we can have people who get caught up in overvalued, exaggerated systems of guilt. But guilt is very, very important because this is focused on the harm that we might have caused other people. And the emotions are not anger and confusion, they're ones of sadness and remorse. And sadness and remorse are quite different from the emotions of shame. In sadness and remorse, we want to repair the harm that we've caused. We want to make amends as quickly as we can. We're focusing on the other, we're focusing on the harm that we've caused. Very, very quickly then, imagine two people, call them Tom and Harry, and they both have an affair, and their partners discover it. Now, Tom has a shame response. So Tom immediately starts thinking that other people will look down on him, they'll see him inferior, as untrustworthy, as a betrayer. And he also might have what we call an internal shame response, where he starts to think, yes, it's true, I'm a bad person, I shouldn't have done that, blah, blah, blah. You know, I now feel bad about myself. Whereas Harry, on the other hand, has a guilt response, and Harry doesn't blame themselves, doesn't beat up on themselves, but they are aware that they have caused harm to their partner, and that is what they're going to be focusing on now, how to work with the partner to try to repair the harm, to try to help that partner feel better, to do whatever is necessary for that partner to take responsibility for the harm that they've caused. So for Tom, who gets shame, I'm afraid it's all about, I'm a bad person, you think I'm a bad person, therefore it's all about me, 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 oh, and don't forget me. So we call that narcissistic, actually. It's a narcissistic focus on the self, the self, the self. Guilt, on the other hand, doesn't have that focus. Guilt is about the behavior. Guilt is about empathically connecting to harm. Guilt is about the desire for reparation, to put it right as quickly as you can. Guilt is about sorrow and remorse, right? Now, when we are working with people who have caused harm to others, research is showing that actually you can go for retributive justice, which is about shaming people and making them feel bad, or you can help people develop capacities for guilt, which is their ability to experience sadness and remorse. Now, in the prisons, feeling sadness and remorse, that ability to be sad for the pain that you've caused, actually you need to be able to grieve for any pain that has been caused you in the past. So guilt is a bit more complicated than people think. But I'm not going to be talking about guilt. I just wanted to make that distinction for you so that you realize that we're talking about shame-based self-criticism, the way we attack ourselves, we focus in on the self. It's different to guilt. If you blend them, they often do get blended. So if we have hurt somebody, then we can go into shame, then it gets a little bit more tricky, but it's always worth separating out these things. So remember then, we've been looking at the way in which shame occurs. It's usually to do from either experiences of being shamed, being bullied, being put down, being harmed in one way or another, or growing up in environments that are very competitive and focusing you constantly on comparing yourself with others. You get triggers to shame. You have experiences of shame and self-criticism. Then we can look at the form that it takes. What do you actually do? What do you actually say? The functions, how does it function for you? What does it do for you? And the effects of self-criticism. Now, there are various styles of self-criticism, right? So one, of course, is one of the focuses is social comparison. Social comparison is a really big trigger for self-criticism and envy as well. Actually, envy is another problem you get with social comparison. When you feel you haven't lived up to your ideals or you haven't achieved what you want, when you blame yourself and personalize, this is about me and it's only about me, that can also be one of the focus for self-criticism. So you can focus by comparing, you can focus by noticing how much you've failed, you can notice by blaming. And there are different functions to it, or different ways of self-criticism. One is called simply self-frustration. Okay, so I'll tell you a story. When I was younger, I had a very busy day, see lots of patients, so I was quite tired. So I was driving home in the dark and managed to miss my drive and just clip the edge of my garden wall. So in goes the headlights, smack over goes the wall. Now, in that point, I was pretty frustrated with myself and said some bad things about myself. But it was past, and of course, when we settled down and got the wall fixed, it had passed. This is very different from those individuals who habitually use self-criticism as a way of trying to stimulate themselves to do better, to try harder. Come on, you can do this. This is useless, you're no good, or that sort of stuff. Or whenever something goes wrong, they always do this self-beat-up job, attacking themselves or criticizing themselves. And this is different again from individuals who basically aren't trying to improve themselves or drive themselves on. They actually just don't like themselves, okay? They, for whatever reason, they have got this self-dislike or even at times self-hatred. And here, self-criticism is more about wanting to destroy or hurt. Now, what's very important is to understand that self-criticism that we're talking about is very much to do with your experiences of yourself, how you're judging yourself. Occasionally, when people experience self-criticism, they can hear the voice of somebody who's been hurtful to them or whatever. If that's the case, that is not yours, okay? That is something that's come into you from the outside, and we're not talking about that here, okay? That's another dimension altogether. When you can identify, no, this isn't actually my voice, this is the voice of someone else, then that is a different issue. This, what we're talking about today, is the way we are critical of ourselves, and we know that it is us that are doing it, right? And a typical process here is when we have an ideal of how we want to be, I think how we want to be, and then we don't match that ideal, so we get disappointed. And when we get disappointed, then we go in for self-criticism. When we do that, we start this process. We start feeling inferior, not good enough. We want to give up. We might dislike or even hate ourselves. Okay, so there it is again, those programs, right? Those programs, you get disappointed, you self-attack, and then you get into this feeling inferior. That's the giveaway. The feeling inferior is the giveaway of the algorithm that you're stimulating, okay? Because remember, dominant, superior, dominance, subordinate, superior, inferior, that's right the way through nature. You got brain programs sitting here. Okay, another slightly more complicated one, but the same basic idea. You have ideas of how you want to be. You want to be competent, successful, assertive, and so forth. But in reality, of course, we're not like that. So parents, of course, want to be constantly patient and ever available for play and fun with their children. But in reality, sometimes that's incredibly difficult. And so we can get quite disappointed in not being able to live up to our ideals. And then sometimes we can even feel that we've become the self we really don't want to be. We've become the undesirable self, the self that we really don't like so much. And here again, when that process kicks off, we start to become quite self-critical. You know, we attack ourselves. I let myself down. I should know better. What's wrong with me? I'm stupid. I'm ugly. I'm bad. I'm not good enough. All that stuff. Then there's the social comparison again. Others are better than me. I may as well give up. What's the point? Now, how can I write this in the slide? I can tell you I can write it in the slide because this is what happens in millions upon millions of brains all over the world. Now, I have to say I haven't met every one of them, but when I've done this exercise all over the world, it's always the same. And the reason that it's the same in millions and millions and millions of people all over the world is because we've all got the same algorithms. We've all got the same wants. We've all got the same needs to be loved and wanted and connected. Remember how I said that was important last time? We all got that, right? And when we can't reach our goals and when we think we are at risk of rejection, these things kick off, okay? It's millions and millions and millions of people have these experiences. So what we want to do now is to help you meet your self-critic. See, and this is called a guided discovery process because it's quite useful to meet the critic, because then that gives us much better understanding of how it's working in us and also how and why we can give it up. Now, the idea is to take you through this, so just sit back and kind of watch what happens. If you find yourself getting pulled in an unhelpful way or it's distressing to you, then obviously just cut off and go and listen to some music or whatever. So the idea is this is to be informative and helpful. It's not designed to be unhelpful. So you have to look after yourself here a little bit. Okay, so function analysis really is, what does it do? So function analysis means, what is the reason? So what is the functions of your legs? What is the functions of your eyes? What's the function of your heart? Okay, simply it's the reasons. What does it do? Okay, so you can go to the party after lockdowns and say, oh, I've been doing self-criticism work and I've learned about the function analysis of self-criticism. You know, sounds kind of cool, doesn't it? You see, people will be very interested. Function analysis. And we're also going to be looking at the fears that people have about giving it up. And we're going to look at the forms and what it looks like. What does your self-critic look like? What does it think? Okay. Okay, so I'm going to fill in a form like this. This is the form we use for what is called functional analysis of self-criticism, the reasons and the forms of self-criticism. And you can see it starts off by looking at what our fears are, and then it looks at what your critic looks like. Okay, so here we start. Now, what we normally do then is we ask somebody to bring to mind something and to imagine that we are going to take away your self-criticism. So you're never going to beat up on yourself again. You're never going to be angry with yourself again. You're never going to put yourself down again. You're going to take it out of your brain. See, take the algorithm out your head. And then we say to people, so what would be your greatest fear about that? And typically people say, oh, well, I would become arrogant. I wouldn't learn from my mistakes. I might hurt people. I would lower my standards. I wouldn't achieve anything. So just imagine if you take away that tendency to beat up on yourself and put yourself down, and you see many people would have that worry. So we say, okay, well, that's interesting. I mean, those are quite interesting things, aren't they? You know, the desire not to be arrogant and the desire not to be lazy, they're all quite good things to want, I would have thought, aren't they? So let's see how your critical self will help you. This is the key thing, right? So now what we do is we invite people just to close their eyes, bring to mind something that they're self-critical about, and then we invite them to imagine that they could see the critic outside of themselves. Okay, and when we do that, this is the typical thing that people say, that the critic can appear as a dark cloud. These are things that sort of things people have said. They're not any one person, by the way, so the idea is not to be able to identify them. My criticism appears like a spider with jaws. If I visualize my critic, it looks a bit like a witch or a pointing finger or a gremlin. It's me, it's an angry me, or it's a parent that's very angry. You know, the facial expression of my parent is being very angry. So you can begin to visualize what the critic is like. And then we invite people to, so what does it say to you? Really listen to what it says. So we give people a little bit of opportunity to listen to what it says. And it says things like you're inferior, you always mess up, you're a loser, you're hopeless, you're useless. And I'll tell you a funny story. Another one is you're a fake. This is very common. I didn't put it in there, but it's quite common. You're a fake. When I was doing this once, I think it was in Italy or somewhere, I'd misheard the person. So I said to them, and I thought they said, you're a cake. So I said, oh, your critic says you're a cake? And the person, no, not a cake. I'm not a cake. I'm a fake. So there you are. So you're not a cake. You're a fake. So what does the criticism feel about you? Now, when you do this with people, they typically recognize that if they allow themselves to really feel into it, that the critic is usually angry and frustrated and quite contemptuous. And if you ask people about what does it want to do to you, what people often start to notice is that actually wants to give up on me, it wants to hit me, squash me, shake me, give me a good kick up the bum. Now, these are examples, right, that millions of people all over the world, if you ask them to really look at and engage with the self-critic, that's the kind of thing they will come up with. And if I then say to people, okay, so how are you feeling now? This is typically what they say. They say, well, actually, now that I've engaged with it and I've listened to it and I can feel it, I actually feel beaten down, disheartened, lost, angry, and discouraged. So that doesn't sound so good, does it? Now, the key thing is know your criticism and you will know your fear. So when you begin to be in tune with your criticism, remember, behind criticism is always a fear. Now, these fears are typically to do with our social connectedness. They're fears of falling behind, not being good enough, not being able to keep up, losing resources, getting rejected or disconnected. Even when it seems like it's not about that, even when it seems like it's only about, you know, having a good body in the gym or something like that, there's typically some kind of basic fear. Sometimes it's a health fear. You know, if I don't get a fit body, I shall die or something like that. But commonly it's to do with this social dimension. And so what it means is that when we engage in that kind of stuff, right, it's just like some hostile dominant putting this down. And guess what? What are the algorithms you're going to be activating? You're going to be running your defensive algorithms of subordinate living. There's nothing else you can do. That's what your brain is set up for. If you have all this going on in your head, then that's the programs you're going to be working. You're going to be activating your threat system big time. Absolutely not your fault. It's really not your fault. Millions and millions and millions of people do this because they don't know, because nobody's shown them, nobody's taught them. This is an algorithm, right? But once you know about this, then you have some choices. So guess what? One of the choices is to notice and to switch. Now, what we do now is to ask people, okay, but given what your critic was about being lazy or being arrogant and hurting people, what does your compassionate mind and compassionate self want for you? Okay? And then people are able to say that, well, my compassionate self is able to realize that life is hard and that actually I'd rather be humble than arrogant. And I would like to work hard. You know, I want to be able to be at my best. I want to be helpful. I want to be talented. You know, I want to have all those things. So your compassionate self is not about kind of just saying, okay, it's fine. You just don't worry about it. Your compassionate self will help you be the way you want to be, right? That's the key thing. And the underlying hopes really is to help you develop courage and wisdom that you can use to help yourself in times of difficulty, okay? Finding the courage and the wisdom of times of difficulty. And sometimes the courage and the wisdom of times of difficulty is to say, that's it, I'm not going to do it anymore. I've done the best I can, can't do anymore, that's it, right? Sometimes it's okay to say, actually, I don't feel like playing with the kids today, just going to eat pizzas or whatever, okay? Well, we'll come to that. So if we then ask people, okay, do your breathing, Remember, do at least a couple of minutes of breathing, grounding in the body, bringing to mind your compassionate wisdom. We all just find ourselves here, okay? Practicing, remember you're practicing these every day. We all just find ourselves here, okay? We're grounding and stabilizing in the body, and we're making a commitment that, you know, we're going to really focus on being helpful rather than harmful, being helpful, not harmful, okay? So then if you ask people to imagine or visualize what this part of you looks like, they'll say things like, oh, it's an older, wiser, friendly me. I have to say, when I do my compassionate self, I'm always a bit taller and I never have a bald patch. There we are. So sometimes people say it's mystic looking, it's a fluffy bear. That was a nice one we had once. An old monk, an angel. Okay, so if you really listen to this part of you, what's it saying to you? Well, it's saying life is very hard, life is difficult. Okay, so the first thing is to appreciate the nature of what we're up against. This is tough stuff, right? No doubt at all, tough. It's tough stuff. So, but if we can just hang in there and to try to focus on the good in you, because the critic, remember, the critic will monitor error. The critic will monitor mistakes. The critic will monitor places where you're disappointed. That's what that monitoring system is. Just like your central heating will monitor temperature, your critic is monitoring for, it's not monitoring the good. Your critic doesn't say, oh, that was fantastic, that was brilliant, you were a genius there. Critic never does that because it's not designed to, it's not wired to do that. The critic is wired to focus on the error or the mistake or the shortfall. That's what it's designed to do. But your compassionate self is designed to focus on the helpful, the good, the useful. That's what that's designed to do. And that's the system you want to be tapping into. And when you look or listen to what your compassionate self says, your compassionate mind says, it will focus about, it will have what it feels for you, it will focus on caring, a sense of deep understanding, sometimes a sense of love and connectedness, sometimes an excitement for you, a belief in you. And if you look at what it wants to do, if you focus on what does this part of me want to do, or it could be my compassionate image, it wants to support you, to hold you, to be there, to put an arm around you, to share with you. So these are all things that people around the world, when they do this exercise, these are the kinds of things that people recognize, that if you stop and you engage with your compassionate self, right, you use the body to support the mind. That's the key thing. You've got to do that physiological shifting, doing the breathing, bringing the focus, bringing the wisdom. We all just find ourselves here. This is not our fault. Life is difficult. Let me just work out what's going to be helpful. If you bring that focus, practice to bring that focus, then you can begin to see this. And when you do that, typically when people do that, they can see that they're actually much more likely to feel hopeful and encouraged and realistic and open. And when they do that, they're running their compassion motivational systems. So that's key, right? You doing the breathing, doing the grounding, doing the focusing, bringing your wisdom into the situation. Now, in a way, you already know this, because think about treating your friends the way you treat yourself. So imagine that your friend calls you up and says that they're struggling and they haven't got on very well with the kids and they kind of lost their temper and they're being frustrated today and everything's just gone pear-shaped. So now you want to help your friend because you know they're struggling, you know, because it's tough. Can you imagine then you turning up and saying, okay, I'll come and see you. So you turn up like a spider or a witch and you say to them, wow, you're just a loser, you are, you're a hopeless case. All right. I don't think you'd have many friends, would you, if you kept doing that all the time, particularly for people who don't like spiders. So the key thing then is to recognize you already have the wisdom that if you do that to people who are struggling, when they've gone down, they're upset with themselves and so forth. If you do that, you're just going to make them feel worse. We often say, imagine the two schools. I like this one. I'm just going to go back a little bit because I like to show you this one a little bit. It's quite fun, this one. Okay, imagine that you have a school, and this is the school of the critical school, and you have a child who you really love, and it's time for them to go to school. And in one of the schools, this is the school of harsh criticism, As you walk through the school gates, there's the headmistress or headmaster coming down the corridor, and they look like a dark cloud. In the corner is the geography teacher. My goodness, there's a spider with jaws. The witch is the mathematical teacher. Gee, gosh. Okay, and they say to you, give us your child, because when your child screws up, cocks up, gets it wrong, or whatever, is lazy, is arrogant, we will tell them, you're inferior, you always mess up, you're a loser, you're useless. And we will show them our anger, frustration, and contempt. And when they are lazy and they do behave arrogantly, as kids do, don't worry, because we will tell them we're going to give up on them. We'll tell them we want to hit them, we're going to squash them, we're going to give them a kick out the bum. So you say, oh, okay, thank you very much. And then, of course, you go across to the other school, which is the compassionate school. And here, as you walk down the corridor, there's this wiser, older person. They look remarkably like you. You think, oh, look at that. This mystic-looking person, they're the physics teachers. Fluffy Bear teaches art. And they say, being a child is very difficult, you know, because humans find this mind difficult because sometimes kids are arrogant, aren't they? And they can sometimes bully each other a little bit, and sometimes they're a bit lazy. They don't try as hard as they should, and so on and so on. This is just how it is. Sometimes they, you know, they lose it a little bit. So we are going to help your child understand that life is hard, teach them how to hang in there, to stay committed. We're going to help them focus on the good in them, okay? We're going to help them feel one with others. We're going to show them that we care about them, show them deep understanding of any struggles that they're having, treat them with love and affection, be excited for them, have a belief in them, even if that belief is tested from time to time, as kids will, of course they will. And we're going to support them, hold them, be there for them. We're going to share with them. Okay, so it's up to you now. You have a choice. Which school are you going to take your children to? Now, the reason that we say all this stuff is because you already know this. The point about it is you already know this. What often happens with self-criticism, people just have not realized, quite unintentionally, just how damaging certain forms of self-criticism are, because it's been playing around in the background there. But when you choose to be compassionate, you become aware that the emotion, in particular, the emotion of your criticism, the hostility, the frustration in the criticism is pretty damaging, right? Now, it's not your fault, you know, because you don't want to be critical about being critical, do you, really? That's the second thing. But just to notice what's happening. So the key thing is then thinking to yourself, well, how would I teach a child to live with joy, confidence, wisdom, and courage, right? That's the thing. How do we teach ourselves in this difficult world, with this tricky brain that gets us into all kinds of trouble? How can we try as best we can to find joy, confidence, wisdom, and courage? That's the key thing, isn't it, really? Now, when it comes to self-compassion, Christian Neff and Chris Goma are international authorities, and they've been working on this for some years, and they've been developing programs of mindful self-compassion to help people. And you can see a lot of wonderful stuff on their websites. Now, they have suggested 3 ways in which we can be self-compassionate. This is ways of being self-compassionate. And firstly, they argue that mindfulness is a very important feature of self-compassion because it allows us to pay attention to when we are experiencing periods of suffering, and also noticing when we engage in self-criticism, for example. As we become mindful that we're into a period of suffering, then we choose to refocus the mind on how to be kind and supportive and helpful to ourselves. And we remember our interconnectivity, our what they call common humanity. We're not alone. Suffering is part of life. And yes, it's true that people suffer in different ways, some more intensely than others. But the idea of suffering is common to humanity, that it's not a mark of some inferiority or exclusion about you. And I suppose one of the things this virus has shown us is absolutely that we are all vulnerable to this virus. No one is invulnerable. Some people are genetically or physiologically or because of age less vulnerable to complications, but we can all catch it. Okay, so when we think about it in terms of the compassion approach that we're following, the evolutionary approach that we're following, we can add a few things to this as well. And that is that mindfulness is also about helping us stick to our intention. So when you have a compassionate intention, being mindful helps you notice when you have been pulled away from that intention. So for example, self-criticism that's harmful, hurtful, and contemptuous in the way that we saw, that is harmful. And so your compassion would bring you into a position of addressing that. The role of courage and wisdom becomes important. Mind awareness becomes important. So you bring into your mindfulness wisdom, which is that we always find ourselves here with a very tricky brain, filled with all these algorithms and potential biological patterns that can really cause us trouble through no fault of our own. It's not our fault. We've got a threat system, a critic that's monitoring our errors. That's partly built in for us. And we can recognize and empathize with the fears and difficulties that sit behind self-criticism. If you remember, self-criticism is often a response sometimes to things that have happened in the past, but often to do with how we are experiencing our cultures and the fear of missing out or not being good enough or being judged and rejected and marginalized. Sometimes the fear is physical, if I don't lose weight, then I shall, have a heart attack and die sometimes, but mostly self-criticism is either generated from or is about experiencing put down, bullying and rejection. The second domains that are very important are learning to switch to a compassionate mind by using your body to support your mind. So when you notice you need to switch into a compassionate mind because your critic is starting to whack off, then you pull into this position. You don't fight with the critic. You never fight with the critic or argue with the critic. We just switch our states of mind, okay? So you're not going to start challenging the critic. We're just going to breathe, okay? Center in the body, get that vagus going, nice posture, okay? Focusing on the intention, bringing the wisdom, and then we switch a motivational state. We don't fight with the critic. We just switch motivational state. And also to remember then that we use our wisdom with the critic. Look, I can see why you are upset about this because you're worried. You want to warn me that if I don't do this, then people won't like me. I get it. I understand it, right? So your compassionate self has the wisdom just to hold the fears of the critic. Hold the fears of the critic, not get blown away by them. And also, your compassionate self will help you balance your mind, and noticing what is not in your mind is as important as what is. Now, your critic is designed to focus on the errors, to focus on the problems. Your critic is not designed to focus on the good. It just isn't, because it's not wired that way. Your critical system is not wired up to your positive reward areas in your brain. There is no connection between the critical process and the reward areas, I'm afraid. There isn't. So we're going to have to make that happen, right? So your critic is designed to focus on the problem, right? Now, if you get stuck with that and you can't balance it, you forget all the good things that you're doing. You forget all the things, all the times when you have succeeded and done well, okay? All the good things that you've done for other people. That kind of goes out of mind because you get out of balance. So it's really important to bring those things that are out of mind back into balance. So if you had a bad day today, well, maybe a couple of days ago you had a good day, okay? So just bring your mind into balance as best you can. That's very, very important. Now, if you look back and remember that when we were exploring what your criticism was going to help you with, you were saying, oh, it would help me not be arrogant, it will help me not be lazy, it will help me, not hurt people. But the point is, if you think about it, most of you want to be decent human beings, most of you, and you wouldn't want to be that anyway. So that is your intention. Generally speaking, I don't want to be arrogant. Generally speaking, I'd rather be hardworking than lazy. Then trust in your own goodness. Trust in your own goodness. Now, that doesn't mean to say that you're always going to make it, because sometimes you won't. Sometimes you will become lazy and sometimes you might be arrogant, but generally speaking, this is your intention. So you have at root the desire to be a good person rather than a bad person. Hold that intention. Okay, that's very, very important, because your critic will just not pay attention to that. Bringing compassionate thinking and compassionate behavior. And again, there are many things in the cognitive literature about how we can pay attention in new ways, how we can think and reason in compassionate ways that can be very helpful to us. We bring our intelligent mind to our need to be compassionate. And third, it's very important to recognize that sometimes, you know, the thing that we need more than anything else is the help of others. The compassion, self-compassion is the courage to seek the help of others, to reach out to others, to be able to trust others to a degree at least. So sometimes, you know, it's sharing our problems, it's admitting we've got a difficulty. Maybe speaking with friends, you know, I'm really struggling with this lockdown, you know what I mean? And sharing the stories, okay? Not just sharing all the good things, you know, why don't you do this with the kids? Why don't you do that? Why don't you do that? But having a way we can share, you know what, I'm just so frustrated, I'm so tired of all this. Oh, shit. Being able to have people you can just share stories with, okay? It's okay, it's all right, we're human, you know what I mean? So self-compassion is also about being honest with each other and sharing and supporting each other, okay? And turning to each other. That's a way of being compassionate with ourselves. And also being compassionate to others can be very important because it gives us a way of getting outside of our own heads. When we're very self-critical, we very much get locked in here because it all becomes stuck in here, stuck in here. But there's quite a lot of data now showing that when people seek to be compassionate to others, they focus on being, excuse me, kind and helpful to other people, that becomes their focus. That's what they're paying attention to. This is really good for the vagus nerve and the body, breaks them out of this self-focus, beat up job. And it really gives them gives all of us actually quite an important focus. And, you know, sometimes you hear on the internet things like, you know, you can't be compassionate to other people unless you're compassionate to yourself. Unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, but that's the load of bollocks. I wouldn't believe it for a moment. And it's very easy to demonstrate. Look, you know, I used to work for the Medical Defense Union as a clinical psychologist and saw a lot of stressed doctors. And most of it, not all of it, was because they were pretty self-critical, perfectionistic, self-critical. But, you know, some of them, you know, well, many of them, I would have trusted them with my life, you know. I would trust them with my life because they were fantastic. They were wonderful, really, really caring people indeed, fantastic. So are you going to tell me then that because they're critical, they can't be caring, wonderful doctors? Are you going to tell me that people who are depressed, who are very self-critical, can't be caring of others? Of course they can. Some depressed people are incredibly wonderful people, okay, but they're very self-critical. That's the problem. So it's complete nonsense. Don't believe it for a moment. And we also know that a lot of people who are not self-critical are not the most compassionate people. So there are different systems. They're not related. But you often hear these silly things being spoken about. But you can definitely be compassionate to others, even if you're critical. So don't bash yourself on the head to that one. Okay, off we go. Now, the ideal and actual self, very important, because this is what stimulates disappointment. And this is the case for many relationships, actually. When we get disappointed in other people, you know, that often sparks off negative feelings. But we want to bring compassionate wisdom. Now, one of the things to bring compassionate wisdom is to understand what is driving that disappointment. Why are we so disappointed? Why are we getting so upset or frustrated and angry? What's the drivers? Now, one of the drivers is because we become perfectionistic. And there's been some brilliant work done by two wonderful psychologists, Paul Hewitt and Gordon Flett. Lots of work being done on perfectionism, not just these two, but they focused on 3 dimensions of perfectionism. And here again, you've got it as flow, remember flow. So there's the perfectionism you have for yourself, I beg your pardon, yourself, you demand it of yourself. Then the perfectionism you think other people demand of you, that they expect you to reach these standards. And if you don't come up to standard, they're going to judge you or look down on you or see you as inadequate in some way. And then there's the perfectionism you demand of others. You expect of them to do this and that and this and that, and you get annoyed with them if they don't meet your demands, okay? So those are 3 types of perfectionism. The middle one that tends to be, not the only one, tends to be the one that causes most of the trouble. So once again, we see it's this social fear of exclusion, rejection, being bottom of the pile, being inferior, being marginalized. That's the one that really gets us because that's a really powerful human issue. Now, another really important person for understanding all this is Karen Horney, who was regarded as one of the first feminist psychotherapists, actually. And she coined the term, the tyranny of the shoulds. And this is very important because she identified how our attitudes to life can be not to live life to enjoy and engage, but because we should, or we must, and we should, and you've got to do this, you've got to do that. And it's sort of an authoritarian tyranny, that's what she said. You know, just constantly, you know, you must, you should, that kind of thing. And she wrote about how we could live more authentically, to drop the shoulds, to do things that are important to do. Of course they are, like obviously look after the kids, don't abandon them, but learning how to do it in ways that are not kind of like this all the time. Another key person that's very helpful in understanding how perfectionism and criticism can kick off, how we can get into trouble, is because of what he called, this is Albert Ellis, very famous Albert Ellis, New York cognitive therapist, rational emotive therapy, or rational behavioral motive therapy, I think it became. And he said, look, you know, what happens is that we engage in the world with starting to masturbate ourselves. You know, I must achieve this, I must do this, I must have that. It's awful if this doesn't work out for me. If I can't achieve this, then I'm a completely useless person. And he said this drive of having to, must do, having to, have to, this tightness is what often drives a lot of distress, because it's all about making these demands on ourselves. And then we tell ourselves it's awful, it's intolerable, it's unbearable if I can't achieve what I want. If I make mistakes, if I lose it a bit, then it's unbearable, it's terrible. So Albert Ellis was very clear on talking about the fact, the way in which we think about our setbacks is very, very important. And the other thing that's been very clear in the last 20 years, and psychologists are writing about this, is that because of neoliberalism and capitalism, because we have such a wealthy, rich lifestyle, we have become full of unrealistic expectations, expectations that are unknown in previous generations and unknown in a lot of the world, particularly in countries where people are simply trying to survive and trying to find enough to eat. And yet we've set expectations for ourselves of what we should have and what we should own and what we should control way, way above that, okay? We've gotten into a habit of just expecting. And there's quite a lot of evidence now that expectations have gone through the roof. And if you can't meet the expectations, then people become either critical with life or critical of themselves. Sometimes we just need to lower our expectations, lower our demands, lower our musts, learn to live in the moment and be with what is. So perfectionists have a terror of error. And this shows you that it's their threat system that's monitoring them all the time. They're living with this constant focusing on the potential of getting it wrong and being rejected. They find it very difficult to take risks. So for example, here's an example, wanting to lose weight. So I decide I'm going to lose 2 pounds. So I try 2 kilos, I should say. So I try and do that, and then it doesn't work out, or I don't keep to my eating plan. So what happens then is I become critical, frustrated with myself. And then of course, what happens is I think, oh, to hell with this, I can't manage this. And I go back to eating chips and pizzas. So that goes on for a little bit. And then I think, oh, now, you know what, I got to try and do something about my body. And then the whole thing kicks off again. So I'm not saying this is me personally, but this is typically what happens. We get into these loops where we try things, they don't work out, then we get disappointed, then we give up, then we stay there for a bit, and then we start all over again. So you want to get out of these cycles because they're not really helpful to you. So how to cope? Well, firstly, the secret of success is the ability to fail. Now, this is true for everything in life. If you're going to drive a car, the first thing that's useful to know is where the brakes are. Because if you know where the brakes are, then if you start going too fast or whatever, you can put the brakes on. If you're a judo person, then learning how to fall is really very helpful. Because if you don't know how to fall, then the first time you get thrown, you're going to hurt yourself. So, and you will be thrown, okay? There's no question about that. So the first thing then is the ability to fail. And that's very important. And I remember talking to a lot of my depressed people when I was doing therapy, and I'd say, we're going to show you how to fail. And they'd look at me with horror. What? I came here to learn how to succeed. I know how to fail. And we'd say, no, you don't. Because what happens when you fail is you launch an attack, and then that really sinks your ship. Okay, so how can we fail? Very important. And that means failing without doing this beat up job on yourself. Now, one of the ways you can do this is to focus on the process, not the outcome. So whatever it is you're trying to do, lose weight or whatever it is, focus on the process, the steps that you're going to be taken. Don't worry about the outcome, because the outcome will always set up a judging system. Do through the steps, and the outcome will gradually unfold for you. So the key thing is learning small steps, taking small steps. Don't set the bar too high. Don't focus on, in 6 months I want to have lost 10 kilos. Forget about that. That will blow you out the water. A colleague of mine in Queensland, University of Queensland, Dr. James Kirby, has pointed out some interesting research showing that if we set the bar low, okay, a little bit, and we learn to get pleasure from small steps regularly and often, this is much more likely for us to carry through behavior change, make it into a habit. If we make the bar too high, we're always trying to achieve big things and we keep failing big things. That isn't so good. That isn't so good. So little and often is basically the way to go, and not undermine it. When I was working with depressed clients, you'd often find they would do small steps and do really well, but then they'd say, yeah, but it's such a small step. Yeah, but for them, it was depressed. It was a really big step, actually, but they'd undermine it. Or sometimes you'd be working with people who are frightened to go out. They have what is called agoraphobia, and you help them get out, maybe just walk down the street a little way. Maybe they hadn't done that for years, and they'd come back and they'd be happy for a bit. And then they'd say, yeah, but it's such a small thing. People are wandering around the world, they're flying all over the world, and here's me getting happy because I've gone 10 yards down the road. Don't undermine small steps. Very, very important. Always take joy from a small step. Joy from small steps. Build in your capacity to deal with setbacks. Very important, this, because setbacks will come, no doubt, unfortunately. But we can't always be exactly the way we want to be. So spend some time when you've got some moments, you're just quiet or whatever it is, to bring to mind a possible setback, okay? And then imagine your compassionate self dealing with that setback. If you're at your most compassionate, most courageous, most wise, how would you like to deal with that setback? In other words, starting to formulate a plan and an idea about what would be helpful to you if you met that setback, okay? Now this can be extremely helpful because it prepares you, okay? Because you're not saying, no, I don't want setbacks. You say, no, setbacks will come. And now I have a way of thinking. I'm going to go into my breathing, bring my wisdom, bring my thinking, in line with what is going to be helpful to me. So you practice. If this happens, that's how I would ideally like to deal with it. And you imagine yourself doing that. So in the case of eating, for example, you might give up the goal of losing weight altogether and simply focus on a behavior change like healthy eating. So you might say, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to reduce the chocolates and sugars in my diet. I'm going to reduce the carbohydrates, maybe less pizzas and that sort of thing. I'm going to switch to slightly more vegetables, less animal fats, and so on. So gradually making shifts that are sustainable for you. And then over time, seeing how the weight goes. But making those small changes that are sustainable for you. Very, very important. Build in doing things just for fun. One of the things we know about perfectionists is sometimes they're fun because they don't do things for fun. They do things to achieve. I remember going on a walk with a friend of mine who's a bit of a perfectionist, actually. And so we're on this beautiful walk. And what they were doing was kind of looking at their Fitbit and thinking about how many steps they were doing and how much exercise, how many calories they were burning off, and can they achieve this in so many, how quick will it take to do the walk? And just say, pay attention to the walk, it's a beautiful day. Learn to play. If you're a perfectionistic, learn to play, learn to play, learn to play. Where the outcome doesn't matter at all. You're just there in the moment to enjoy the moment. Okay, learning to play is very important. remember then that these algorithms, like perfectionism, like monitoring error, like the terror of error, like criticizing yourself, like putting yourself down, they're all algorithms in the brain. And this is why millions upon millions and millions of people do it. They do it just like you, because it's wired in here. Now, you didn't choose that, right? You did not choose that. What your choice is to notice it and then choose how you want your mind to go, how to switch into a compassion motivational system. That is your choice. It's kind of hard. It's not easy. It takes practice. So here's another example then of learning then when we get disappointed to go into compassionate wisdom, shift into your compassionate body state. Remember always the breathing, grounding, posture. And if you practice this, throughout the day, if you can, you'll get into these states much quicker. Separate out the feelings of frustration from self-attacking, very important. Always think about your fears that are sitting behind your critic, okay? And notice your ability to experience and tolerate disappointment. Now, one of the things your critic will do is it will actually stop you from experiencing the emotions of the disappointment, okay? Supposing, for example, you booked your wedding day for, I don't know, March the 2nd, say, just so. So you're really looking forward to it. But then March the 2nd comes and it's absolutely throwing it down. It's really cold and it's wet and so on and so on. You'll have a number of disappointments about that, right? Working with how you process the disappointment. But if you start on, oh, this is typical, I knew I shouldn't have booked it now, blah, 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 it's all my fault, blah, 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 blah. That attacking will stop you from working on the emotions of the disappointment, which might be sadness or anxiety, or how am I going to sort this out? How I'm going to organize this, I've got to organize that, right? The attacking will get in the way of you actually processing the genuine disappointment and upset of what's happening for you. Okay, so very important then that we learn to process our disappointment without this whack, whack, whack in the head, because that won't help you. That's just another thing to drag you down, right? Okay, so your take-home messages really are the fact that all of us have a brain that's been built for us, not biased, and life is difficult, life is harsh, It's often full of setbacks and sufferings and disappointments and so forth. And we're all struggling to do the best we can. But it really does help if you know your algorithms and you choose how to work with them. And for us, it's not just about self-talk. People say, oh, it's the way you talk to yourself. No, not really, because these algorithms are stimulating really powerful body systems in you, okay? That's what they're designed to do. Long before humans came around with their thinking brains, they operated in animals. They were designed to run the show in animals. Fear controlled an animal's behavior. Sex controlled the animal's behavior, okay? The desire to eat controlled the animal's behavior. That's what they're designed to do. They're designed to take control of behavior. So when they kick off in us, that's what they'll be trying to do, okay? That's why when we become mindful, we can say, oh, okay, so I've got this system now that's sort of monitoring and putting me down. That's part of my algorithm. I don't want to get too caught up in that. What I have to do is to bring my mind back to where I want my mind to be, which is in my compassionate self, because my compassionate self has wisdom and courage. Okay, so I'm going to, on purpose, bring my mind here. That's the key thing, because I understand what's going on in my head. So remember, cock-ups are rarely intentional, because if they were intentional, then you wouldn't be disappointed, would you? You'd be quite pleased about it. If you chose to screw it, you'd be pleased if you did. So you get disappointed because it's happened, you didn't want it, it's unintentional. So just always remember that. That's why compassion is so important. So remember that we're at our most compassionate, and wise compassion is for things that are difficult, not they're easy. Compassion is for the dark side, it's for the hard things, the difficult things, the painful things, the screw up, the cock ups. That's when we need compassion. We don't need compassion when it's all going well. Great, you enjoy it when it's all going well, but there we are. Okay, so remember there are multiple sources of wisdom, and I've got a few internets here for you. One of them, this is the Christian Net Talk, which I think you'll really like, and that talks a distinction between self compassion and self-esteem, nice talk. Ronnie Granville, who's compassion-focused therapist, done a nice talk. He's from Finland, did a nice talk on self-criticism and compassion. Albert Ellis, this is a short little video about Albert Ellis, and he talks a little bit about all the basic principles of rational emotive therapy, including masturbation. And also there's a video that we made, or I didn't make, but King's Fund and colleagues made, called Compassion for Voices. Now this, it's a little cartoon, it's about 5 minutes, but it's really it's brilliantly done. I didn't have much role in it, but it is based on compassion focused therapy. It's brilliantly done. It is for people who hear voices, but you'll see it's also very helpful for dealing with self-criticism. Very helpful doing self-criticism. Okay, so I thought I'd just finish for you with a little bit of a personal story that I sometimes tell in my teachings. So it's the year is 2007, 2008. And I've written a book, or been writing the book. It's taken me about over 4.5 years, called The Compassionate Mind. It's slightly long and I'm wanting to cut it down, but as I'm about to finish the book, very tragically, my father starts his dying of lung cancer. And so I left that for a bit and went to be with the family during this very painful time and stayed with him. And we tried to get him into hospice, but we couldn't because no beds, usual thing. So we nursed him at home. Anyway, so he died tragically, and I came back to Derby to continue to get this work done because the publisher were waiting for the book, obviously. And so they came for me to send the book. So I sent it off. Little notice from Microsoft. Thank you, Microsoft. This has not gone through. This hasn't arrived. So I thought, okay, I better split it up into chapters. So split it up into chapters. So started to send the chapters. Little Microsoft notice. Bounced. Everything I tried for about half an hour, however long was it, bounce. And so then at that point, I just had a rage attack, which is amazing really for me, of course. So I was doing real Basel 40, screaming at my computer, I'm warning you, you know, all that stuff that you do, screaming. I was really screaming. And I'm saying all these words. I was actually saying words I'd never heard of myself. You know, it was quite incredible. So eventually I had to kind of stop all that and just accept I couldn't send the book today after all the work I'd done on it and everything. So I got to run out the front door, slam the door as hard as I could, jumped in the car, slam the car door as hard as I could, drive off at 100 miles an hour, still effing and blinding, you know, as you do. And then guess what turned up? The critic. It says, so here we are, look at you. You're completely out of control, you mad. You just written a book. You can't control everything. I mean, look at you, you've got completely out of control of your mind. You're way over the top, you're screaming your head off like a mad ape man. It was really going, you know. So now I've got two things, right? I've got all of this frustration about I can't get this book off, it's all out of deadline, and I've got the critic whacking into me. Then I start to think to myself, oh my God, my wife was at home, she would have heard me screaming and shouting like a mad thing. Oh my God. And I'm trying to drive at the same time. Anyway, just at that moment, there was like another part in the room, and it was my compassionate self turned up. And it said, Paul, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. It's not your fault, right? You've been under terrible stress. You had the death of your father's really hit you hard, and you worked so hard on this book, and it was awful this morning when you were so ready to send it off after 4.5 years. It's been absolutely terrible, but you do need to slow down. Just slow down. It's only going to be okay. Slow down, take a breath. You're all right. Don't worry. It's okay. And it was really quite like another voice in the room. It was so incredible. So that's exactly what I did. And I pulled over to the side of the road and I had a little cry, and I took out my mobile phone and I phoned my wife and I said, I'm so sorry, you must have heard such a raging, you know, and in fact, she hadn't heard very much, which surprised me. If she had, she would have said, oh, well, what's new then? Not really. But it was a real experience for me, which was really quite important, because you need compassion when shit hits fan, right? That's when you need it, right? So it's really, really important to recognize that we all do sometimes lose it. You know, we do. We don't meet our ideals. We don't meet our goals. We are fallible human beings. And sometimes it's very distressing when we do screw it up because it's not intentional. There's no way would I ever intend or wish to behave like some mad ape person like that, really. And that's doing a disservice to the apes, I have to say. So just be aware, that whenever things are tricky and difficult for you, try as best you can to remember that for the most part, it's not intentional. It's not, you know, we screwed up. We're not intentional, but we can learn from it. We can be compassionate to it. We can hold ourselves compassionately. We can use our wisdom. We can use our courage. We can use our voice tone. Remember the voice tone of compassion? The slowing of the voice tone. We can use the breath. Okay. So a little story for you there that I hope you find useful. Okay, so there we are. That's the end of this talk of looking at how to work with compassion, giving you a few ideas. As I say, there's lots and lots of wonderful things on the internet. Go and check them out, see what works for you. I haven't tried to give you lots of training in how to deal with self-compassion, but just give you some pointers about how to think, how to look at your critic, and how to maybe use compassionate self to help you. Okay, so in our next talk, which is talk 13, we're going to be looking at how to develop and cultivate and deepen your compassionate self. That will help you in times of difficulty. So goodbye for now. See you next time.